Several days ago, a man in his 50s, for reasons that are still not clear, stabbed 5 people outside a school in Dublin, Ireland, including 3 children. And then almost immediately after, parts of that city erupted into rioting. What exactly is going on here? Well, the Washington Post stepped in helpfully to explain. And here's the tweet the Washington Post sent out. Quote, "Online rumors claimed the perpetrator of a stabbing attack was an immigrant. The BBC found that the man was an Irish citizen who had lived in the country for 20 years. Police blamed, quote, a lunatic faction driven by far-right ideology for the riot in Dublin." That was the Washington Post's explanation. But actually, the man was an immigrant. He was from Algeria, and as it turns out, he's been living in Ireland for 23 years at public expense. He has never had a job. And then last week, unaccountably, he stabbed children. Well, many people in Ireland are absolutely sick of this. It's happening by design. That country has been completely transformed by immigration. It's not the Ireland you remember at all. And going forward, anyone who complains about that or questions government policy will be guilty of a felony. The new hate speech laws are coming to Ireland. No complaining about it. And of course, it's not just Ireland, it's across the West. What does this mean? What is happening here? And what's the right response to it? We thought it'd be worth talking to Steve Bannon. He's the host of War Room, an old friend of ours. It's his birthday today, by the way. Happy birthday, Steve.
Thank you, Tucker.
So it seems like Ireland's, of course, a small country, an island in Western Europe, but it seems like this is kind of almost a metaphor for what's happening across the West. What do you make of the rioting there and the government's response to it?
Well, look, you've been to Hungary. You know, Viktor Orban has led this fight for years and has tried to get his country, the sovereignty of it, to stay away from what's happening in Germany and places like Ireland. Ireland's probably one of the worst, if not the worst, because the political class has totally sold out the people. You know, they've had, I think, 125,000 immigrants in the last year. That is the same equivalent if all of Joe Biden's 9 million illegal alien invaders here in our country all came within 1 year. That's the impact it's had on Ireland. And they're all on the public dole. There's been 100,000 Ukrainians in 18 months or 20 months since the war started. 100,000 Ukrainians all on the public dole, all paid for out of the Irish budget. Now, some of that money is given by the EU, but the Irish politicians are by far the worst that are bought off by the EU. They're the biggest globalists. They've sold out the sovereignty of the Irish. And you're seeing a natural blowback, and you're really seeing it among working class people in the cities, Irish nationals, Irish citizens, whose family have been there for generations and generations and generations and have nothing to show for it, and also in the rural communities. So Ireland is a powder keg. And I think what you saw the other day in the response by the Garda, the response by the authorities was immediately to go after Conor McGregor and other folks who were saying, hey, we need to address this. We need your proclamations are no longer good enough. We need to see a plan of action because there's been enough of these immigrants attacks on citizens, including a year ago where there was, I think, a murder of a school teacher by an immigrant. So the Irish people, I think, have had a belly full of it. But you're seeing this is across the West. And it started with a mass immigration in the 60s and 70s, but really been picked up since the Syrian civil war and what the Germans did back in 2014.
So the Irish government is trying to replace the population of Ireland with people from the third world, obviously. Well, why? What's the justification for that? Ireland was never a colonial power. These are not people they once ruled coming back to the mother country. The same people have lived in Ireland for thousands of years. They have a native population and they're being replaced. Why would someone want to do that, do you think?
I think you're seeing this because the political class is very tied to Brussels. The political class, and there's really no true opposition party when you think from a populist nationalist perspective. They've got a couple of small parties that are starting to grow. Of course, you got Sinn Féin, who's the political arm, or the IRA, who are more and more taking on a nationalistic bent. You've got a couple of small parties, one's kind of Trump-inspired, to combat this. But I think these people are seeing, and look, you talk about the great replacement theory and people, people get very upset when you talk about it, but you just look at the math. This has happened across Europe. It's happened in Germany. This is why Orban has been so singled out. This is why, quite frankly, Giorgia Meloni, who, was a person who we supported a lot when she got in there because the EU was going to cut Italy off for money, really backed off a lot. on this immigration policy. The Germans and the people in Brussels, the party at Davos, just doesn't think the working class European population is very controllable. They think they're dangerous. They think they're the cause of these world wars in World War I and World War II. And so they've always been, they've tried to control them every way possible. Now they're using immigration. And Ireland is one of the worst examples, and that's why it's a powder keg.
It does seem like there's race hate at the bottom of it. I can't think of a better explanation. I mean, there have been wars in Africa, sort of every week for my entire life, and no one's saying we've got too many Africans in Nigeria, let's replace them with Indians or something. No one would even think to say that. But poor Ireland, which didn't really do anything wrong on the world stage that I'm aware of, is, in 100 years, there'll be, a minority of Irish people in Ireland. That's a big change, and it's on purpose. How could anyone read that as anything but an expression of hate?
You're right. Contempt for their working class, for the working class of Ireland. This is why, Tucker, I think they're cracking down so hard. You've seen what they've tried to do to Viktor Orban, who's kind of become the leader of this, the political and intellectual, public intellectual leader of this. They've tried to isolate him for years, although he's been right about the Ukraine war. He's been right about what happened in Germany in 2014, about the sovereignty of his country and the sovereignty of his people. But in Ireland, they've taken it to a next level. They immediately came out, and they're prosecuting right now, I should say, investigating Conor McGregor for hate speech, for some tweets he put out and a couple of statements he made. The Garda came out and they've arrested 30 people, and their whole focus is on the prosecution of the people that stood up to this and the people that, quite frankly, were angry about it. The entire focus has been going after the population and to try to cow them, to try to say, no, if you stand up to this, you stand up to the political class, if you have an opinion,